There's been plenty of noise surrounding the Sixers and Paul George, and even some surrounding Sixers and Jimmy Butler throughout the season. However, there is a dark horse name that has entered the conversation as far as the missing piece on this team, that being Barndon Ingram. So what we do know is this report from Brian Windhurst saying that Barndon Ingram and Jimmy Butler are two, quote, names to watch for the Sixers during the offseason. Quote, there's going to be a number of names that are going to come up, but I'm going to give you two. The first name to watch is Jimmy Butler, and another player to watch is Barndon Ingram. Now, why I think this is especially interesting is Ingram does seem a bit of the odd man out in that New Orleans Pelicans core, and I do think it is time to act now for New Orleans, that there's too much talent on that roster that they have to find a way to take that next step. Now, in Ingram and that entire organization's defense here, that Zion Williamson's injuries have been the largest reason why that has not occurred, and I do think we are talking with a different tone if he's able to suit up on an as regular basis that they would. Now, in Zion's defense, he played a ton this year, more games than I believe he ever had in his NBA career. Just unfortunate the hamstring injury happened in the playing game against the Lakers, which I really would argue was probably the best performance of his career until that point. Ended with over 40 points, was playing eye to eye with LeBron James. But nonetheless, that could open the door for Barndon Ingram to pursue other opportunities. And we are seeming to get every indication that is going to be the case. That most recently we got this report from Evan Sidrey here saying the Pelicans are not expected to offer Barndon Ingram a contract extension this offseason. Ingram is eligible to sign a 4-year, $208 million deal, but New Orleans will be going in another direction. Trey Murphy III is also eligible for a rookie scale extension, expected to pay him $20 to $25 million annually. All signs point towards New Orleans prioritizing Murphy over Ingram as their wing of the future. New Orleans will have Ingram's $36 million salary and valuable draft capital in an attempt to pair another star alongside Zion Williamson. So, for starters, I love Trey Murphy III. He's awesome. I understand this logic here. From a skill set standpoint, he probably does make more sense for a team built around Zion Williamson, that Murphy, a much better three-point shooter, much more willing three-point shooter, that he is a guy that is capable of the catch and shoot. He's also, the more and more that the Pelicans put on his plate, the better and better he looks, which is typically not the case with that archetype of players. So it does leave Ingram as the guy kind of high and dry here. But the other side of that coin is if he were as good as I believe the Sixers will be hoping to be the case, then why are they in a rush to move on from him? And to dive into the contract for starters, that it mentioned, he is extension eligible. He's in the final year of his contract. At his age 27 season, he'll be making $36 million. Now, why this is difficult for the Sixers specifically is they spent all this time clearing out cap space already, and this is a guy already under contract. But there are flexibility and things you can do. And the Sixers don't have the type of player. Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid are clearly the future, clearly a pairing that they have zero interest, should have zero interest in breaking them up. If there's sort of a sign-and-trade situation, maybe the Pelicans are find their guy that they believe is the missing piece in the free agency market. Maybe it is Paul George, and he wants to go down to New Orleans. Then the Sixers are in a good position to work themselves into be the sign-and-trade distributor there, to be the guy that gets in the mix, signs the guy, and ships him off. Sixers are also in a nice space because of the draft picks that they are capable of trading, that as of this offseason, they have 4 first-round picks that they are capable of trading. So the way that works in this type of conversation is if there is that big fish star, then maybe it's a 3-way deal where the Sixers are producing the draft capital, where the Sixers are ending up with Barndon Ingram, and whatever the desired player is ends up in New Orleans. So there are options in which it comes this way, but I think by every angle I slice this, there's a less clear path to Barndon Ingram than some of the other players that we have talked about in this conversation. And I think there's fair reason for that. I think there's fair concern just beyond the bridge to get there. That when you look at these 3 players objectively, and these players I'm talking about, Paul George, Jimmy Butler, and Barndon Ingram, who seem to be the 3 at the forefront of this. LeBron James also somewhat in the mix, but I think that's a bit more of a pipe dream until we have something more concrete to go off. But I did want to look at them in comparison. And looking at their stats here, this specific season, in the 23-24 NBA year, Jimmy Butler produced 20.8 points, had a 62.6% true shooting percentage, 6.4 offensive win shares, and 2.7 defensive win shares. Compare that to Barndon Ingram, 20.8 points per game, the exact same at Butler, but at a 57.8% true shooting percentage, just 2.7 offensive win shares, and 2.4 defensive win shares. Then to contrast that with Paul George, 22.6 points per game, 61.3% in the true shooting percentage, a 4.4 offensive win shares, and 2.8 defensive win shares. Now, this is a lot of stats that you can't fully dig into, but I did think it was interesting to put it side by side. I guess my main takeaways from that being the gap between these players is not insurmountable, but I do think it is clear that there is a 1-2-3 as far as talent when it goes Paul George, Jimmy Butler, Barndon Ingram. Now, the appeal to Barndon Ingram here is he is a guy just about to be 27 years old, just coming into his prime. To be perfectly honest, I don't think he's been in a situation that has properly optimized him yet in his career. That he started off with the Lakers, has joined the New Orleans Pelicans, where he's not as high in the pecking order as I kind of expected to be the case. Even C.J. McCollum is the guy calling the shots there, in addition to Zion Williamson on a lot of nights. And there are the Trey Murphys and Herb Jones of the world who can take over. Herb Jones, obviously more of a defensive piece, but the point being there's a ton of talent that Ingram gets a little more lost in the shuffle that I would like to be the case. And to touch on his stats specifically here, that he's played 8 seasons in the league to this point. This season with the Pelicans, averaging 20.8 points per game, 5.7 assists, 5.1 rebounds, a 35.5% three-point shooter on three-point attempts per game. Those three-point attempts are something to note that, for me personally, it's very important to me, spacing the floor around Joel Embiid. That I think that's the name of the game for maximizing this team, is constantly having shooters. Ingram's not an incapable three-point shooter, but he is a guy who is much more comfortable in a Tobias Harris-esque pull off, take a dribble, and take a hard long two rather than just let the three-pointer rip. Now, some of this, again, I do think is situational, that there are better three-point shooters around him, the Trey Murphy, the C.J. McCollums of the world, that he can get to his spots there. And I'm also much more willing to entertain the Barndon Ingram conversation, considering that Tobias Harris is off the books. But the point being that I still don't think he's the carbon copy of player in which would optimize this Sixers team. Now, the appeal being that he is 27, that he is still getting better and just approaching his prime right now. And what that does mean from a championship window standpoint is if you believe Barndon Ingram is that level of dude, that he is this third piece, that missing piece on a championship team, then you can keep this window open a little bit. That we're talking about Joel Embiid at age 30, Tyrese Maxey at age 23, and Barndon Ingram at age 27. That there's very much a world where the power balance of this team could shift where Joel Embiid, clearly the alpha, the number one option right now, as he progresses through his career, as his body continues to further break down, that it's Tyrese Maxey and Barndon Ingram set to pick up some of that slack. That I very much see, and I think people undersell this point, I very much see a world in where this Sixers team with Joel Embiid is still a contender without him being the 35-point-per-game version of himself, where he takes a reduced offensive role, still is locked in on the defensive side of things, still playing and getting his when he needs to, but that there's other guys capable of carrying that offensive weight. In order for that to be possible, you have to find guys capable of carrying that offensive weight. And obviously, Tyrese Maxey is going to continue on his progression, continue getting better. But you have to have a hard look in the mirror on if Barndon Ingram is that level of dude. He's a very good player. He's far better than Tobias Harris once again, and I will still throw in the same caveat that if you straight up take Tobias Harris off this contract or off this roster and put Barndon Ingram on it, the Sixers get significantly better. But unfortunately, that's the reality of the situation. Is I do think Tobias Harris is probably the least productive player per capita in NBA history. That he's the highest paid player to never make an All-Star game. He's the highest paid player to never score a point in an elimination game. There's a ton of records that you can dive down that way, and I don't want to make this the pound on Tobias Harris video because we're through it. Water under the bridge at this point. Go enjoy playing out the rest of your career in Detroit or whatever other loser organization you end up. But the Sixers do have to find a guy that is capable of playing high-level playoff minutes. And Ingram's still a bit unproven in this regard too, that he has not been a guy just to see the spotlight to this point. And this Pelicans team, that they've had some moments, they're an intriguing, fun team, but it is a bit concerning to me that for them looking to take the next step, they'd believe that does not involve Barndon Ingram in it. So I guess my final conclusion here with Barndon Ingram, I'm not shutting the door completely, but I think there's a bit too many red flags for me to pass up here. That I think stylistically it's not exactly what I'm looking for. Defensively, he's not what I would hope for in a player. That I think both Paul George and Jimmy Butler are a decent gap better than him defensively. And then when speaking about what he's thought of within the construct of a team, it's pretty concerning to me that the Pelicans seem a bit eager to move on from him. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know if you think I'm wrong, if you are a Barndon Ingram guy. I do like that he is younger, but I don't think I can overlook the gap in talent. So Ingram's a guy that if he is to be the dude, they absolutely have to come in with another piece to complement that. And I am in favor of that I guess philosophy as well, that rather than putting all your chips on one guy, such as a max contract with Paul George, if you can get Barndon Ingram for less than that and add another piece. But I don't really see a world where that is the case because Ingram seems pretty money hungry, ready for it, and I do think a team will pay it if it's not the Sixers. And of course, as I mentioned, not the easiest path to get him on the roster in general. But once again, I do want to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments. Appreciate each and every one of you for tuning into this. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button to keep the Digest family growing. Drop a like to let me know you're listening, and I'll talk with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.